Good morning. Our presenter today is Chaz Franke. He's a therapist at Chestnut Health Systems. He specializes in adolescent trauma. He also teaches at McHenry University and St. Louis University. He's going to be presenting on practicing early intervention through the art of listening, specifically with at-risk youth. Okay, thank you, Chaz, for being with us. You can start.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to open with a bit of a story that's something that's kind of been with me for a long time and got me going on this kind of topic. I was asked to speak at a high school. I'm here in Southern Illinois. It was not immensely close to me. Within about an hour and a half away from me, they asked me to come talk to the seniors in their high school. And I said, well, what do you want me to talk about? I mean, that's kind of my move. I feel comfortable discussing things. And so I said, what do you want me to talk about? And the social worker in the school, a wonderful woman, says to me, well, relationships. And I say, oh, okay, well, what about relationships? And she says, well, basically, teenagers are always having a hard time in relationships. So just talk to them about relationships. And so I thought it was kind of like the most vague topic that I'd ever been offered ever. So I really couldn't think. I mean, I wasn't going to go in there and say, hey, how are you guys getting along with your boyfriends and your girlfriends and who's popular and who's not? And I mean, I just wasn't comfortable with that. And so I really racked my brain to think, okay, how can I make sure that everybody's okay? And so what I thought about was, that kind of shows you that sometimes we really don't truly grasp what's affecting the student age population that we're working with. And B, it kind of shows you that maybe sometimes we're just having a hard time listening. So what I ended up discussing that day in particular was how to make sure that going into late adolescence and early adulthood, how to make sure that these were still people that could assert that what matters to them matters. Because what I really started thinking about was all these people in these relationships, if they're devastated by these relationships, are surrounded by a world that just says, well, who cares? You weren't going to marry him anyways. Or you're only 17. You have no idea what a relationship is. And what happens is that takes our student age population emotionally, and it makes them better at ignoring what they need. It ingrains that general attitude that what matters to me doesn't matter. That's what it's going to do to somebody who maybe is struggling with self-confidence, let's say. So as I started working in this conversation, I was really focused on that topic. Like, let's make sure that what matters to you matters. Don't get good at assuming that if you need something, it's going to bother somebody. Don't get good at explaining away what you feel. Get better at being able to communicate. And so within a couple of days, I got a phone call from a mom wanting to know if I could see her daughter. And she tells me that her daughter came home and said, Mom, there was a guy that came to my school today, and he was talking about everything that I feel all the time, and I've never told anybody. And I need to go talk to him. And Mom said, oh, of course, honey, we'll get you a therapist. I understand. And she said, no, I need to go talk to him. I need to go talk to the guy who seems to understand. And I immediately saw this person. I mean, long story longer, we have a wonderful relationship. She's an excellent client of mine, and I'm so proud of her. But kind of the moral of it was, I feel what I did there was really simple. I just told a bunch of people that it's okay to be heard, and it's okay to be understood. And I got a huge response from it. And it got me working on, well, wait a second, like, what are we really wanting to listen to when we first kind of encounter a student or an adolescent or a client? What are we really wanting? And so a lot of the things that I kind of put together was how to be that presence. So the first thing in being a presence for somebody is authenticity. My favorite thing about working with adolescents is you have about 30 seconds with a student-age person to be very real. And if in that 30 seconds you are not authentic, then you simply become one of everyone else. As a therapist, which is my primary source of time spent, I love that opportunity, because if the one thing I have to be for you is not like everyone else, I should be able to do that. And I should simply be able to do that by being authentic. That's the true center of everything that I try to accomplish, is to maintain authenticity. Another thing is we do let our nonverbal communication betray us somewhat frequently, meaning that we get distracted, which is very noticeable, especially one-on-one. Also, the way that we're positioned when we're communicating is important. The way that we're facing someone, making sure we're not doing anything else. We all know the tricks and trades of things like eye contact and things like that, but this isn't nonverbal communication from the point of view of, am I reading another person? This is, am I present? I used to talk every now and then with a therapist by the name of Robert Rosenbaum, who wrote a couple of books, Zen and the Art of Psychotherapy, and another book on the Tao Te Ching. And in those books, he would mention, and he had said to me, that when he was talking to somebody, he would frequently just check his posture. Say, how am I sitting? And he was shocked at how often he noticed that he had slid in his chair, or that he had kind of turned further away from the person he was talking to. And he wasn't even doing that consciously. So he got in the practice of kind of straightening up and being more attentive that way. And the reason why I would bring that up here is because we're seeing a lot more and more in the research on the benefits of right brain to right brain communication. Okay, those are the aspects of the mind that aren't necessarily verbal. Okay, and so when we're with another person, when we're with a student, specifically in my case I'm talking somewhat here about adolescents, we know that they are an emotionally driven being, which means that they are experientially driven, which means that their mind and their demeanor and their temperament will respond to our calmness and our presence, because it's simply right brain to right brain communication. If you know that you're telling someone to calm down and you yourself are very upset and frustrated, that person will inherently not calm down. Logically, they'll escalate, because their right brain to right brain communication with you is their unrest responding to your unrest, and you guys are simply dancing and you didn't even know you were partners. So your genuine presence creates a genuine calmness, which means there's open communication. And what that builds up is a sense of safety. And when you're working with someone as a communicator, that sense of safety is optimal. The best thing I have going for me, I swear I wish it was some brilliant aspect of my personality, but the best thing I have going for me is that I set up a good, safe, quiet place to communicate. People comment all the time about, wow, this office is really relaxing. And I think that that's a multitude of things. That's because I've been mindful of how I'm positioned in the room, how the chairs are positioned, the rug in the room, what is the likelihood of interruption. Do I make sure that when someone is in the room with me, it feels like nothing else in the world is happening? Okay, when we're working with a student-age population, they're coming to us, we're looking for this opportunity to intervene on what's stressful to them, and they need to be able to feel safe with us. And we can do a lot for that. I don't care what role you play in working with these people. You can be somebody who is a very strong presence, and that safety allows for that. So a big part of what we talk about in the clinical world has been the role of intuition. And I noticed that a lot of people, they turn on their intuition. If you guys have ever heard a phrase like insight isn't enough, that's an old therapy phrase, knowing that a person can't just learn and learn and learn about themselves. They have to be able to apply some skills. But my thought was always, I just kind of ask if I think there's emotion in the room. One thing I've noticed with a lot of nonverbal communication is I've become fascinated with the eyes of the people that I talk to. And it's because the eyes are going to be the first thing that lets you into emotion. A lot of teenagers that I work with and adolescents that I work with, they have already developed phrases that kind of bring them back out of an emotion they've never been able to address. And so the eyes will betray that, because the eyes will be something where you notice that change. Maybe they're a little bit more bloodshot. Maybe you notice a little bit of the beginning parts of tearing up. Well, you won't notice that unless you're following your intuition, unless you're feeling with this person. So then you can simply ask, gosh, it feels like some emotion came up there. Am I right or wrong? I'm very comfortable, even early in a relationship, saying, I'm going to ask you questions. They might be crazy. All I need you to do is tell me if they're crazy. If I say, God, it felt like that was kind of emotional, and it wasn't, then all you have to do is tell me it wasn't. What's the harm in asking? And that's where a lot of our life experience comes in. Everybody has professional experience, and that's going to continue to grow, and that's what makes you an amazingly powerful source for a lot of these people that we're talking about. But you also have that life experience. You also know that you've been brought into the job that you were brought into because of how you feel and how you relate and how you connect and how you communicate. You don't ever want to turn your back on that. Another thing that I bring up when we're talking about self-awareness is self-care. I recently gave a talk on something called trauma stewardship, and it was also based on a book by a woman, Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky was the woman's name, who wrote Trauma Stewardship. Good luck finding that one written down. But it discusses all these ways that you have to be not just taking care of yourself. Are you shopping enough? Are you getting your nails done? Are we getting our hair done? Are we going hunting? Are we going to all of our hobbies? But self-care is how we become the best version of a person that is good for the people we're serving. And that's what's important, is what are you doing that makes you better at being a steward for people's discomfort, at being present for them. And some of that is self-awareness. How are you growing in your knowledge of yourself? Because that's going to remove blind spots, which means you're able to intervene in people's needs earlier. Our blind spots, the things that are still affecting us, or the things that we avoid, or the topics that are really difficult, those things are going to prevent us from being able to see maybe what's actually affecting the student that's in front of us. The teen, the child, the adolescent that's in front of us. And so I always go by one rule. The person in the room with me will go as deep as I will. Meaning I have to be somebody that is always working to be open and present, because that way, that gives the person the opportunity to have as difficult or as deep of a communication with me as is necessary in that moment. Sometimes we will underestimate the ways that we kind of hamstring these interventions because we're not somebody that somebody can talk to, or because we have some kind of transferential concerns that we kind of avoid every now and then that I'll talk about a little bit later. But we have to be somebody that is not just intuitive, but intuitive to the point of our own heightened self-awareness, so that we can actually hear what's going on with the person that's sharing the room with us. Now, I wanted to talk relatively briefly about the role of diagnosis. And I know that not everybody on this would be directly diagnosing, but of course we all know the controversy surrounding bipolar and ADHD and medication and over-medication and so on and so forth. But since diagnosis is with us, I always say let's look at, does it play a role? Can it inform what I'm trying to do? Now, one thing is very obvious, which is diagnostics can help us educate. Okay, a lot of times people are relieved to know that their anxiety is not some new monster that has never been seen before, or to know that the fact that they can't seem to get anything done actually has kind of a name. And it provides that educational option. With that educational option, it provides a bit of a roadmap. It provides you the opportunity to, as a person intervening, to say, here's my role, and maybe we can get this person to play this role and this person to play this role, and once we're all moving together, we'll see a real, true plan of action. Most of us therapists, I love to collaborate. I love working with a school social worker and a teacher and a principal, and I meet all these wonderful educators that simply come to me saying, I want to make sure I'm doing what's best for these kids. You know, and of course, that just becomes our shared goal. I mean, what's more powerful than knowing that I'm not alone in wanting to help the person that just came to me for help? You know, it's such an empowering thing, and it makes us so much more capable in that particular moment. And so the other aspect of it is it's kind of exemplifying whether or not there's a current relevance to a certain diagnosis. You know, we know, I'll give you an example, is because we're all worried about whether or not we overdiagnose ADHD. A lot of times I've worked with somebody who has struggled with this diagnosis and struggled with a million different medications and all these things for a substantial amount of time. And when I talk to them and I listen to them, what I end up hearing is anxiety. I end up hearing somebody who is worried that if they don't do everything right, they're going to get in trouble, or somebody's going to pick on them, or they get panicky, they get overwhelmed, they start to assume that they're not good enough, they experience shame. Well, if I think that the test I'm taking could be the thing that gets me isolated, shamed, rejected, and probably ridiculed to a heightened extent, it's really likely that I can't focus. And so I work with a lot of kids who very specifically are struggling mightily with something like anxiety or depression, and it is what is distracting them. But nobody's really ever asked. And so what becomes really important in that moment is, can you be the person that is just simply asking? You know, and then you get an opportunity to initiate creativity. And I think one of the things that we neglect as people that are trying to listen and trying to intervene is we neglect our creativity. And that, to me, has always been the benchmark of whether or not I was functioning as a clinician, is my creativity. I look immediately for the opportunity to be a creative presence in someone's life. And so what that is that's that combination of intuition and clinical skill. So for me, I always go through kind of a checklist in some order, not in this particular order, but just in some order. I always want to look at, am I being creative as a problem solver? Like, am I talking to you, am I engaging this person's strengths and their passion and their empowerment and their support in the most creative way possible? You know, a good example of creativity is so often you see the kid that he's got a lot of energy and he's pent up and he's got all this aggression, and so everybody says, I know, let's send him to like a dojo so that he can learn discipline. And you know, that's hit or miss. I mean, it's going to be hit or miss. I very much so enjoy that option. I enjoy a lot of the martial arts, but in terms of self-regulation, a lot of things are like Tai Chi and Qigong are the things that have great support for self-regulation, not like, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But that's probably because there's a body of work for the first two and not for the third one in terms of self-regulation. So it's creative, though. It's the first option where you see somebody getting creative. Creativity means I'm listening to you. It means I'm willing to say, just because this thing isn't working doesn't mean we're out of options. That's a huge part of listening. And the other thing is, do you feel, as the practitioner, as the person in service here, do you feel you're getting the chance to truly listen? See, for me, I mentioned my office just a few minutes ago. That is a place where I get to truly listen. The door gets closed, there's no phone ringing, there's no email going off, and I understand that's my job, that's my craft, is to be a psychotherapist, but at the same time, it's very important to me that I feel like this room is all that's happening right now. And when I don't feel that, when I feel there's distractions, there's too much noise, there's, not a comfort in the room, I assess for that and I assess for what I have to change. Because then that way I'm making sure that I'm the best possible conduit for as early of an intervention as I can possibly do with somebody. Another thing is, are you allowing your priorities and values to remain evident? Now, I understand the old school idea of being kind of a blank screen as a therapist, and I know that I'm speaking as a therapist here, and that's not directly for everyone that would be listening, but I know that it's okay for me to be a person that has values and priorities that are present in the room, because my values and my priorities are listening, are being present, are being authentic. And as long as I can stay with those values, then I maintain my integrity. And you want to make sure that you can feel the presence of your integrity, that you feel that you're really close to what you care about. When I talk to other therapists about compassion fatigue and burnout, and that's something that I present on somewhat frequently, we talk about when you get your list of clients for the day, do you look at that list and have the opportunity to just know that you're going to be present? Or do you look at that list and say, oh gosh, if this person cancels, then I'll be able to get this work done. And oh, my 2 o'clock is never here the full hour, so at least I'll have a 20-minute break there. And are you immediately breaking yourself out of your value structure? If you do that, you are really incapable of listening in that moment. So a true intervention that could be really listening, the opportunity to say, wow, I think this kid's actually depressed, not mad. That opportunity just flies away because we've exited our values. We've kind of struggled with our integrity. And so it becomes important to say, okay, if I want to be an early interventionist in this, and when I say early interventionist, I simply mean I want to listen as attentively as possible, as quickly as possible. Nothing fancy about it. Because for me as a therapist, therapy moves as fast as it has to move. I'm not someone that does a lot of name that tune therapy where I'm just going to absolutely get you out of here in 2 sessions, or it's only going to take me an hour and a half. If it takes me an hour and a half, that's awesome. If it doesn't, that's okay, because this isn't for me. And so when I'm assessing, which of course is normally the initial early discussion, the assessment involves a lot of empathic listening, which is I don't want to just listen for a diagnosis. I want to listen for the opportunity to see what it's like to be you. Okay, and when we're working with the student age population, that's optimal, because a lot of times we listen to the student age population strictly as adults. We have this cool knowledge that whatever's bothering this person isn't going to bother them forever, unless it's really dark and difficult, which is my particular wheelhouse as a professional. But one of the things that is really important is empathic listening means I'm feeling with. I'm getting the opportunity to know what it's like to be you if you're in the room with me. And that's what's important. A really old school therapeutic phrase would be content versus process. Content is your story. I'm okay with your story, what's been going on, what's been happening, so on and so forth. But what I really want, if I want to be productive and intervene effectively, is I want process, which is, what was it like to be you in that? Okay, and that's a very important part of empathic listening, almost as important as the relationship. There's a really interesting study that came out not too long ago about theories of psychotherapy. And what found was pretty much every marketable therapeutic style was roughly 2/3 effective. You had about a 66.7% success rate with any reputable style of therapy. So in research, in the science world, that means one thing and one thing only. That's not a very important factor. If it's the same across the board, that's not the difference maker, clearly. So what happened was they had to go, oh, well, so what does matter? And what panned out through a lot of that research, and what continues to pan out through a lot of research, it's the relationship. It's the person doing the intervening, along with the person that is desiring the intervention. That's what matters. So there's nothing more important than your presence with this person. And so you become good at questioning. You know, you take an authentic interest in this person. I'm a freak for nuance. I'm annoyingly persistent. I don't let anyone off the hook. When someone's telling me a story, oh my God, I want to hear that story. I'm so interested in that story, and I want to hear every word of it and every nuance. And if I have an empathic moment where I think, gosh, I bet that was so frustrating for this, or I bet that drove mom crazy, I'll ask, and I get so involved in this process. And what that does is it gets me interested, and if I'm really truly interested and the other person knows I'm interested, my changes, the changes that are made, and the way I ask questions, and any mistakes, maybe any jumping the gun that I make, is an acceptable part of the process because it was done in the framework of genuine interest. And that's the optimal interaction, is genuine interest. I truly just want to know the detail of what it's like to be you. And what that creates is a very dynamic relationship. It's fluid and it's changing. And it allows you to see where patterns are happening. Now, when we talk about early intervention, it brings me up to an old Albert Ellis phrase. Albert Ellis was a guy who he invented rational emotive behavioral therapy, or rational emotive therapy, you might see it, which was kind of the precursor to cognitive behavioral therapy that Aaron Beck eventually graced us with. And what Albert Ellis would say is, as a person doing intervention, you need to know how to fail fast. Which is, Ellis would say, take a student, not a student, but a student therapist, a young practitioner, teacher, social worker. They're going to have 4 or 5 little interventions that they love. So for me as a therapist, it would be these 5 theories that I initially just fell in love with. I love my Rogerian client-centered, and I initially loved cognitive behavioral therapy, and then kind of fell in love with like psychodynamics, which is a specialty of mine now. And he would say, you take that list of 5, and you start with your favorite. And as soon as that person's not interested in your favorite, you get rid of it. You go on to number 2. And by the time you're a master therapist, or somebody who's been doing these kinds of interventions and social work and teaching and all these things for so long, you should have a list of hundreds of interventions that you can fail off of with some frequency and some speed. And one of the reasons why that's important is, as a relationship builds, the presenting problem changes. Now, I'm not speaking here strictly therapeutically. I think that a change in presenting problem is something that most of us can see in an hour. I think any of us that have had someone, a student, come to us or be referred to us or just see us, we've had that conversation where what they initially said compared to how the conversation ended was miles apart. And that's an authentic presence idea. It's that this person comes and they're just so mad and frustrated, and they're going to get in a fight, and they're going to do this, and they're going to argue this way and that way. And within like 20 minutes or a half hour, that same person is tearfully describing how just disrespected they feel, and that nobody cares, and nobody listens, and nobody's doing anything. At that point, what is a more early intervention than the fact that you, as a practitioner of this listening process, took a person in the midst of an argument and turned them into a person in the midst of a significant change in how they communicate? It's as early of an intervention as you could ever get. And all you did was you asked yourself these questions about your integrity and your presence, and you stayed there, and you stayed interested. One of the things that I talk about a lot as a therapist is the concept of organizing principles. Organizing principles is just an old psychodynamic style of phrase that basically means those old dynamics that were born really young, that are how we made sense of how people treated us in relationships and so on and so forth. You're going to see a lot of these with the student age population, especially with adolescents, because the adolescent mind is still going to have those old principles. If you've got a kid that grew up in a house where they really were basically neglected, you probably have somebody who really thinks that having any kind of needs is going to get them rejected. Well, that's an organizing principle. And you can see that no matter what role you play, you'll probably start to notice those things. Gosh, this person is always in relationships that nobody's really paying them any mind, or everybody, all the rumors in the hallway are that they just, like, he just gets mad at her all the time, or she just accuses him of things all the time. Those are old principles. And why it's important to bring that up is there's this constant interaction when we're trying to intervene on things with the potential of transference. Now, when I bring up transference, throw your intro to psych out of your head. Let's not think about Freudian transference or anything weird like that. All transference is, for the sake of our conversation on how to listen and intervene as early as possible, is how does this person treat me the way they treat everybody else? That's all the transference you need to worry about, no matter what role you play. Because that's one of the first things I want to know. Because a lot of times when I get somebody who's depressed that I really want to listen to, and I'm really trying to make them feel heard, one of the things blocking is their assumption that, like everyone else, I don't want to hear it. Or their assumption that what matters to them isn't that important. You'd be shocked at how many 17-year-olds I see who will stop themselves from talking about something hurtful because of their assumption that there's other people out there with worse problems that I should be helping. Okay, at that point, I'm being treated the way that person treats everyone else. I'm being treated transferentially. I'm being treated as another person that is going to not want to hear it. So I work through that transference process. I'll even say that sometime. I'll even say, you're treating me like everybody else. I told you I'm interested. I bring it up, even if it's in a casual process, I'll still make sure to refer to it, to make it present in the room is kind of my term. And one of the ways that I can do that is furthering my development of trust and safety. I ask myself a question sometimes when I feel like I'm not connecting to somebody, which is I'll say, how much of me is in the room right now? I'll say that in my head. I don't say that out loud. I'm not that bad. I'll say, how much of me is in the room right now? And what that means is, have I been wordy? Did I just use a lengthy kind of intervention? Did I just tell maybe an irrelevant story that I just thought was an interesting metaphor but fell flat? And I'll check that to see, to make sure that I'm not taking up too much of the room. I want to make sure when I'm having a conversation with someone who has a need, even if it's a crisis, even if it's sudden, that person feels comfortable filling the entire room. That I'm not that present. I'm not taking on more than belongs to me. And I always liked the phrase, how can I help? I'm a licensed clinical social worker, which means at some point in my life, I was a person who felt I could save the planet. And so whenever I would have people come to me with a need, I would escape my strengths to try to fill that need. I'm going to try to find a million resources, and I'm going to try to find housing, and I'm going to make a dozen referrals, and I'm going to say, I'm sure we can take care of that. When in reality, I'm the person's therapist, and that's what I do. And so rather than overstepping and trying to do more than I was capable of, which was really just the way I was satisfying my own anxiety, I just didn't want to tell somebody that I may not be the person that has that resource. I became somebody that would just say, okay, how can I help? And at that point, I almost immediately turned back to, let me listen and understand. Let me be creative, because those are the ways I can help. If you're somebody who is a school social worker, if you're somebody who is providing groups to kids and everything like that, and you're doing all kinds of interventionary things, at that point when you say, how can I help, that's what you're going to want to go to is, what do I specifically know right here, right now I could do? And it's going to give you that opportunity to stay present. You're not going to get distracted by trying to do things that normally you don't do, because nothing is really more important than your ability to be a present and stable source of comfort. It creates that open space. And the reason why I harp on all these kinds of esoteric concepts isn't because I'm avoiding kind of real quantitative conceptualization. I'm harping on it because this is how you create an environment where you can intervene on the thing that actually matters. See, a lot of us want to do early intervention, which is awesome because it's a wonderful concept, but we end up wanting to do our early intervention as fast as we want to, when we could do a faster version of getting to what is really going to give this person the opportunity to feel understood. Because our opportunity to intervene is the greatest of privileges. I love creating narrative with someone. I love storytelling. I love the fact that a person is going to share things with me that no one else has ever heard. I mean, imagine, anybody that would listen to what I'm saying right now, you have probably been a person who has heard something no one else has ever heard. That's amazing. That's an opportunity that is afforded to few people. And it's not an accident. If that has happened to you in that moment, you were a conduit for that narrative. That's what is just so important. And you can hear this story. And once you hear somebody tell you a story, you get that opportunity to say, well, wait a second, what can I really hear here? What's a detail here? What might be getting missed? What might not be understood? Especially if maybe you have someone who initially got frustrated with another student, and then it escalated to a teacher being involved, and then it escalated to an office worker being involved, and you're maybe the fourth or fifth person to hear some version of why this person needs assistance. And that's that crazy, unique opportunity to do just a very present moment of listening. Knowing that this person probably hasn't said anything to anybody who is less intelligent or who doesn't know what they're doing or who doesn't do a good job. No, it's your opportunity to hear what hasn't been heard yet. And that starts change. Because people won't change if there's no benefit to change, and people won't allow for an intervention if there is no actual safe place to discuss that opportunity. And that's what we can create no matter what we are. And we can do that in the moment. Okay, we can do it in the initial conversation. A lot of people that I work with will come to me, and I get the privilege of hearing them say, no, I really want to come back. It really seems like you really understand what I'm talking about. And that just blows my mind. Like, how humbling is it to know that another person who has intimately lived their story thinks I may understand it? Like, that's amazing. And I get the opportunity to do that hourly. I don't get the opportunity to do that once in a blue moon or every now and then. I get the opportunity to do it hourly. And I want to work. I'm always working to be that kind of model for change, which means I have to get better at it. Just because I have that opportunity may not mean I always do it. And so I have 3 simple rules a lot of times for listening, and they came to me from a meditation teacher named Shauna Shapiro, who I had an opportunity to spend some time with and listen to. And I'll start with the bottom 2, which are attention and attitude. We seem to know that. A lot of us seem to be very good with the concept of, okay, I need to pay attention and I need to be positive, or I need to be uplifting, or whatever it may be. The missing component a lot of times is intention, which is in the moment, do you have an intent? Do you know what you're here for in that moment? And if you set intentions throughout the day, you would be shocked at how productive and capable you feel. Just setting an intention, knowing that when a student is speaking to you, you quickly set the intention of, I want to make sure that I'm taking the time to help this person feel understood. And right there, you set that intention carries through. If you need to set an intention like that every 10 minutes, great. If you need to do it twice a day, great. But don't forget that moment-to-moment intention. A kind of a random example that I would always utilize is I like going to conferences. I like hearing people speak. I like the real masters of the craft to be presenting and talking about their ideas. And one of the reasons for that, I realize now, is when I hear somebody talking about what I do, it makes me really interested in what I do. It energizes me with just how cool of a job this is and my daily opportunity. And so when I go to conferences, I try to sit and throughout the day set the intention of, I'm here to listen about why my job is so interesting, engaging, and important. And it's kind of kept me from getting bored a lot, because we can get bored. There's probably aspects of my dialogue right now that are kind of snore-worthy, but I appreciate the opportunity regardless. So the true opportunity of listening becomes that dual process of change. Carl Jung used to always say that intervention and therapy wasn't effective unless both people were changed by the process. You know, there's a snowball effect of being regarded as a listener. You get that opportunity to be someone who is present and who does care about what's being said in front of you. And you get that opportunity to feel with someone, to bear witness, to not turn away. And if you are somebody who doesn't turn away, then immediately you're an agent for change. So this is not a big, lengthy process of me speaking as some depth psychoanalyst. This is, if you know you won't turn away when someone is struggling, then you can immediately start to see what's affecting them. And if somebody feels heard and understood, it changes the entire course of their health. They don't act that same way anymore. They can navigate more effectively. And so I usually end, I have a quote by Helen Keller that I've always liked, and I'll kind of explain why I like it to close, is that everything has its wonders, even darkness and silence. And I learn, whatever state I may be in, therein to be content. I realize as a listener that one of the things that I do, and one of the things that energizes me and that I was built for, is I'm okay bearing witness even in a dark or frustrating moment. I find it a very important thing, and I find it a great opportunity for growth. And I found that if I work towards this moment-to-moment contentment, my role as somebody who can intervene quickly, it grows. I become more and more capable of the opportunity to see just what's affecting someone, not just see that, oh, this is a person with ADHD and their grades are failing. You know, no, I can say immediately, I know that you're struggling. What do you think is happening? And I can get more of that presence and maybe find that anxiety. And it doesn't mean that I'm discarding the other things that maybe we know, like an ADHD or family history of bipolar. I mean, I'm being as thorough as I need to be, but it means that I'm maintaining my creativity in the moment. And that means that I can be creative even in a darker moment or in somebody's crisis or frustration. And I love the idea that when I talk about these kinds of things, I'm talking about them in the framework of the context of people who share that passion with me and who can hear it and who want to hear people. And so I always take the opportunity to end on a quote like that, because I know that the people listening to me are also people who share the skills I do. So you guys would all have my admiration in every context. And I truly appreciate the opportunity to share this kind of information, and will always welcome any contact, communication, and questions therein. So I appreciate it. But that is all I have to say.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate what you shared. It was really, really interesting. So this concludes this webinar. Thank you for listening.